Hello and welcome to Become the Teapot. I'm Iain.
And so am I.
And our given task is to observe and chronicle comic books and their film adaptations within this sector of the universe. For there is an infinite number of variables in the multiverse where destiny has taken unexpected turns. But alas, still not one where 20th Century Fox have made a good Fantastic Four movie. But never let it be said that we don't make sacrifices for you, dear listeners, so this week we have been immersing ourselves within the rich tapestry of the 2007 film Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. Why, you ask? Well, so that I can introduce Iain to the Silver Age of comic books, as I take him all the way back to 1966 with Fantastic Four issues 48 to 50, also known as the Galactus Trilogy. It's an arc that boasts the introduction of not one, but two iconic Marvel characters, and as if that wasn't enough, we've also thrown in Fantastic Four Annual 3, so that we can pay a visit to the wedding of Sue and Reed. But first, let's see how they portrayed these events in the film. Iain, what were your thoughts?
Oh, I loved it. It's a bad film, but I love it. As you'll soon see, I like bad films.
I know you do, yeah.
This is one of those films that came way before the MCU. So this is that period where they didn't really put a lot of thought into the characters and the storylines and things like that and comic book related themes.
Well, actually, this only came out 1 year before Iron Man. This is 2007, Iron Man was 2008.
Well, why is it so bad then?
I don't know. You found this a lot about these old comic book films, is they were ridiculously cheesy. And they've all got the same sort of emphasis on one-liners.
Yeah, there are a lot of cheesy jokes in this, but I laugh at all of them pretty much. There's the rock slide joke, just the way that the Human Torch and the Thing talk to each other.
They're not too bad, are they? The casting, I think, of both of those, of Chris Evans and Michael Chiklis, I think is not bad, actually. They both inhabit their character and they portray it well in this sort of over-the-top action film. But I do think that we have now come a long way since this, even though it was only, 13 years ago.
Yeah, and like you just said, it's a year prior to Iron Man. But it's one of those films that I could put on and watch so many times because it's so easy to watch. It's a family fun film, but there are bits that you do cringe at.
Yeah, there's not taking itself too seriously, though, and then there is just bad. And I differentiate between something like Ant-Man, where it's quite good fun, it romps along and comes to an end, whereas this just seems a bit all over the place.
Out of the three Fantastic Four films, I'd say it's probably the best. It's the best of a bad bunch.
Yeah, it's not stiff competition, is it?
I would definitely put this one above the previous one, because I think the characters in this are more fleshed out almost. Not quite as much as they could be. I want to say they're more in depth, but they're not really.
They're not really, no.
I think that they've gotten used to the role that they're playing. The only one that I really have an issue with is Sue.
Yeah, I was going to say, they've all sort of not taken it too seriously, apart from Sue, who's really sort of struggling her way through it.
Yeah, she just seems really whiny in this, and just like the jealous girlfriend type.
Yeah, a little, yeah. I don't think either of the films has been that kind to her. There just seems to be a lot of emphasis on jokes about her getting naked or being seen in her underwear in both films, which I thought was very strange for, like you say, a family-friendly, fun film, to sort of rely on that. And I think the other FF have got a lot of charisma, even when they're saying these terrible lines, whereas I do think Jessica Alba struggles a little bit with it, of trying to inflect something with a bit more personality on top of this terrible dialogue.
Yeah, the sort of two bits that come to mind with her is the fact that she has that zit when she's getting married.
Yeah.
I'm like, why was that in there?
It was weird. I also didn't understand how that worked. Like, surely that would have just made an invisible hole in her head.
Yeah, I don't even think she knew how that worked.
I don't think they thought it through.
No. And then the other bit, as you said, that she gets naked in this again, like she did in the first one. She does say, "Oh, why does this always happen to me?" And I think it's not the character saying it, it's her saying it, the writers saying, why? Why put me on like this?
But yeah, there's definitely a couple of weak links. The other one I'd say was Doom.
Yeah, I don't know why they brought him back, really. They didn't have to.
No, he wasn't a good Doom in the first, but they sort of turned him from a very haughty character almost in the comic books. He's a very serious, but then again, massively over-the-top dictator. And they turned him into sort of a smarmy businessman.
Yeah, so I don't like that they brought him back, and I don't like the character, how they've made him.
Well, I'm quite looking forward to seeing him in the MCU, where they've already established magic and things like that.
So yeah, he's not actually in this comic.
No.
So I've not read anything with him in. What's his actual powers in the comics?
So he's extremely intelligent, is first of all. He knows a lot about magic and the occult. He is also the leader of a country, Latveria, and as such has a huge amount of diplomatic power and is rich. He uses technology a lot. He's one of these characters, he's got a bit of everything.
So is he kind of like a mix of Iron Man and Doctor Strange in a way?
Yeah, in fact, actually, I think they made him Iron Man for a bit. But he's also just a very high and mighty character generally. He's there's a great line from him, I'm trying to remember I was a god, but I found it beneath me. And that's just his personality, you know, which doesn't come across in this film. Obviously, his actions in this film, I think they are drawn from another comic. It's Fantastic Four 57 to 60, so only about 10 issues later.
Well, why haven't we read that? Again, you didn't need to bring him back. It should have been purely a Fantastic Four, Silver Surfer, and Galactus story, in my opinion.
I agree, because I think what you end up with is you get very little Silver Surfer. You don't get much from him at all. He sort of flies around for 2/3 of the film being a sort of unknown menace. And then he has about 2 speaking scenes, and then he flies off to fight Galactus. And Galactus you barely see at all. So I think if you're already vaguely familiar with Galactus and Silver Surfer, you don't learn anything about them from this film.
Well, we'll come on to the big bad in a bit, but let's talk about the Silver Surfer. I mean, I think the effects that are used, they are quite good. Some bits especially do hold up today.
They're all right. Yeah, I mean, they are only 13 years ago. I would say it looks a lot worse than Iron Man, which was made the year afterwards. But yeah, no, there's effects and there's sections of it. The fire technology for Johnny Storm, I think, the effects are fine, but it is only 13 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that whole scene when the Human Torch and the Silver Surfer are having that little chase scene, I guess, that scene to me is really good. What did you take of the scene where Silver Surfer tells the story to Sue and his abs literally portray exposition? Yeah,
it was an odd choice, wasn't it? I mean, it's literally as well. It's not even. He doesn't show that much backstory. It's nothing that we don't see in the original 5 minutes of the film, which makes me feel like they just reused that footage. But it's very strange that he decided to show it on his abs.
It's like a weird PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's like a Teletubby.
Yeah. Uh-oh, here comes Galactus.
Yeah, no, it's odd. But yeah, I mean, obviously that dynamic in the film is him and Sue Storm, who basically have 2 scenes together, whereas in the comic it's Alicia Masters, isn't it?
Yeah.
He has that sort of relationship with, which, sidelines that character a bit, but I kind of get, for streamlining sense, why they did that.
Yeah, it's a shame that, they gave that particular role to Sue. Say they gave it to Ben's girlfriend, it would leave Sue to do not much at all in this film.
Yeah, it's like she gets sidelined for the entire last battle after she gets injured. I noticed that they give Chris Evans a lot more to do in this film. He's the one who gets all the powers. He's the one who gets the power shifting thing. He's the one who has the chase scene with Silver Surfer. He really seems to be a central focus of this film. I can't really remember the first film. I'm trying to rack my brains. I think that may have been focused more around Mr. Fantastic and Ben Grimm anyway, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Doom as well, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, a comment from last week that I'm going to bring forwards into this one. Because you talked about your favourite portrayal of a character, and you said it was Doug Jones from Hellboy.
Oh, yeah. And he obviously plays the Silver Surfer in this.
Yeah.
And once again, they've dubbed over his voice.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. The actual human part of it is him, but then they've used the voice of Lawrence Fishburne,
yeah. No, I did notice that, and I don't think the voice lends much to it at all, to be honest.
I mean, I think he does have the certain tone and the gravitas.
Yeah, he's certainly got a deep, bassy voice, which is obviously what they wanted to go for.
Just going back to the power swapping, there's a scene fairly early on where Johnny and the Thing switch powers.
Yeah, it reminded me of... Do you ever see the second Scooby-Doo movie where they all start switching body?
Yeah, sadly I did. I find it quite funny that when Michael Chiklis becomes the Thing, his voice goes really deep and gravelly. But then when Johnny becomes the Thing, his voice is exactly the same.
Yeah.
They've not put that weird effect on his voice.
Well, also, he just looks like Chris Evans, but kind of rocky. Whereas Michael Chiklis, although he's bald, that's the only real similarity between him. He has this hulking great massive suit on him, but they just sort of paint Chris Evans.
You saying that, it kind of makes me think of what they did with Deadpool and Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah.
He's supposed to become this horrible freak, but they've just put this sort of weird skin condition.
Yeah, that first Deadpool way, he's like, I can't go back and see Vanessa because what will she think of me? And you think, well, you still kind of look like Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, you still look okay. I kind of feel like in this, if you walked past the actual Thing, you'd be a lot more scared than you would if you saw the Human Torch.
Definitely. But yeah, speaking about his voice as well, I was very confused about why he suddenly had bear roaring powers as well.
I think it was just to portray how loud he can get and how his voice gets so deep.
Why is that his power? What he's strong. Why can he shout loud and roar like a bear?
Yeah, I mean, surely that bear would just attack him.
I don't know. There's a lot of stuff like that happened in this film that I kind of felt like the writers gathered 2 or 3 other scripts and jokes they had already written and threw them into this film and went, yeah, that'll do.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's probably worth saying that Kevin Feige, or Kevin Feige, was an executive producer, which I wonder how much input he had on this.
I don't think a lot. He was an executive producer on a lot of Marvel properties before the MCU. I know certainly the Garfield Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man films, he was an executive producer on those. There was all those leaked emails from Sony. I'm not sure if you remember this a while back.
Yeah.
And there was a list of suggestions that Kevin Feige made of Amazing Spider-Man 2. And they all sound pretty good, and they basically ignored every single one of them. So I think he was an executive producer, but I don't know how much attention was paid to him at the time.
Should we move our focus onto the big bad in this film?
What, Doctor Doom? We've already spoken about Doctor Doom.
No, the big old scary cloud.
Yeah, I hesitate to call him the big bad. The threat is not really there. You have a character turn, Silver Surfer turn up, dig some holes. I think this is about the 3rd act that he says Galactus is coming, and then by the end of that act, they've defeated Galactus. So he's almost a non-entity to this film. This film, it should revolve around him. It should be building up what a massive, credible threat he's going to be.
Yeah.
He should have turned up, and they basically try and do everything they can against him, and it's all completely pointless because he's above them by, magnitudes. And they use Silver Surfer in this to turn the tide. That would have worked. But instead, he sort of turns up, is about to engulf the planet, and then is immediately defeated, like literally as soon as he turns up.
I mean, I feel like probably one person was like, should we actually create this massive, towering, scary person? And there's like 6 others were like, no, let's turn him into some cloud. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Clouds are scary.
In Ultimate Fantastic Four, or Ultimate Extinction, I think was where it appeared, he was a sort of a drone cloud. So he was all these little bots that had that sort of Galactus headgear shape that made up a big cloud, and that was what was coming to destroy the planet.
Kind of like the way that Mysterio created things in Spider-Man 2, Far From Home. He's got all the little bots that turned into like a sort of CGI effect. Kind of like that.
Well, in as much as there's bots, yeah. But no, it's just there's just loads of them. So it creates this sort of swarm. Like it looks like a cloud, but it's a swarm of these little robots.
That would make more sense than just a big old cloud.
Yeah, that's what my biggest disappointment from this film was. Because it's not a good film, but it is, like you say, it's fairly light-hearted. So, you don't want to take these things too seriously, but I just wish there was a little bit more going on. There was a lot of talk about the world being destroyed, but at no point did I feel that was actually going to be the case.
Yeah, and the fact that on his way to Earth, he goes past other planets, and they also get destroyed.
No, because the Silver Surfer in this, I think, still, like the comics, he still seeks out viable planets to eat. So I think Galactus does just drift by other planets if they don't have the right vitamins and minerals for him to eat.
Well, there's a bit that he goes past Saturn, I want to say it is, and as it goes past, the planet just starts to vanish.
Does it? I thought that was casting a shadow over it.
It looked like that the planet just started to disintegrate as he went past it.
I might have to rewatch that because I didn't take that from that scene at all. Like the opening scene is him eating a planet and then you see him travelling through space, but I thought that was just a shadow passing over the planet, and that wouldn't make any sense at all if he could just drift past planets and dissolve them. I mean, not that this film makes much sense anyway.
Well, yeah. But yeah, anyway. So I say, take out Doom and you would have a lot more screen time for the Silver Surfer and Galactus.
Yeah, definitely. I think it should have been a lot more focus on them as characters, as the comic was. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think they're proved to be unimportant. They're a looming threat, but one that is resolved very quickly in favour of a little interpersonal dynamic between Doom and the Fantastic Four, and then Silver Surfer gets wrapped up in it all, and then goes off to fight Galactus on his own. So the Fantastic Four actually don't encounter Galactus.
Yeah,
they're on Earth. Silver Surfer flies up to fight Galactus. That's as far as they go. They're done. Right, thanks, bye.
The Human Torch has a little bit. He pushes the Silver Surfer on a bit.
Yeah.
That's the only one of the 4 that has some sort of interaction because he sees him up close, I guess.
Yeah, but their big battle is Doom, giving Johnny all 4 of the powers so he can go and fight off Doom.
Yeah.
And then they beat him by hitting him with a crane.
and
Which
putting him in some water.
any construction worker could do.
Yeah, I know we touched on this earlier on about the swapping powers,
Hmm.
but I don't get how all four of them are holding hands then gives all four powers to the Human Torch.
Yeah, because Human Torch's powers would go to them, because it's always shown the powers swapping before.
Yeah.
So even if they all touched him at the same time, they all would have got his powers, but he would have got all of theirs. So he'd still only ever have 3 of the powers. They've not thought it through.
No, of course not. Am I right in saying that that's kind of like Super Scroll?
Yeah, Super Skrull. So yeah, he was given the powers of all 4 of the Fantastic Four.
Mm-hmm. So I think they must have taken other inspirations from other sources across the Fantastic history.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think also what they did is, and this happened a lot, is that they would just use sort of these scripts that are just kicking about Hollywood with ideas in, and they'll just take those and fit them in to meet the plot that they're using. There's a famous story with Kevin Smith talking about him drafting Superman. There was a producer there asking him to include polar bears and tarantulas and things like that, and he wanted Superman to fight a giant tarantula.
Right.
Anyway, long story short, that producer went on to produce Wild Wild West with Will Smith.
Wiki Wild
which
Wild
obviously
West.
at the end has a giant mechanical tarantula.
Again, terrible film, but I love it.
I thought you might. So yeah, I mean, it's not a good film. It's cheesier than Fondue, and it's sort of everything that was bad about superhero films prior to the MCU starting. You know, there were good superhero films back there, light-hearted, fun films, but this is just not one of them.
So you're saying that you don't like this film?
I'm saying that I'm not in a hurry to watch it again. That I watched it last night and it didn't offend me. It passed some time.
I mean, it's only an hour and a half long, so it's not too long. I feel if it was 2 hours, it would be far too long and drag on.
My view of these films is, you know, if I'm in the mood for a fun, light-hearted film, there are better ones to watch.
Yeah.
So I don't know why I would waste an hour and a half of my time watching this again.
So, to sum up, you don't mind this film and you like Fondue?
To sum up, I don't think this is a good film. And I get taking things at face value for what they are meant to be, but I think you still have to put some critical analysis against it. And I think this basically fails on pretty much every measure.
You must have laughed at the stupid stag do scene when Reed is dancing with the girls.
It's weird, isn't it? It's so weird.
It's a bit like he literally just chucks his leg back. I'm like, what are you doing? That's not a dance move.
It's really dangerous.
You could have kicked someone in the face.
Also, do all of Reed's clothes stretch?
Yeah, I didn't understand that. I get his suit stretches because it's made to stretch, which is fair enough. But when he's in a tux...
In fact, all of their clothes are mostly impermeable, apart from, of course, Sue Storm, whose clothes have to burn off at a moment's notice. So the one thing we haven't actually talked about then is the wedding of Sue and Reed. Because obviously there's 2 weddings in this, one at the beginning which gets ruined, and then the one at the end. Well,
just to jump to the end, they have no friends there. They've just got married with a bunch of strangers. They're like, oh, we're having a wedding. Let's get 25 Asian people just to stand at our wedding.
They get Alicia there. Alicia comes over, as does the same priest from the beginning of the film. But they can't get any of their other friends there.
No, there isn't any time. But yeah, so the first wedding. It takes up the first third of the film, considering it's supposed to be about the Silver Surfer and Galactus. They waste so much time on the wedding.
They waste it on the wedding, they waste it on the intervention with the military, and also then Doom as himself, even though the film is named after Silver Surfer.
Yeah.
At what point in this film did Silver Surfer rise?
Yeah, I don't know. Why didn't they call it The Coming of Galactus? But again, that's no better than the rise of the Silver Surfer, because he does not rise, and Galactus doesn't really come. As in, he doesn't appear. It's more like he passes. It's the passing of Galactus.
He doesn't quite arrive.
Yeah. I actually forgot that the actor who plays the Colonel is Captain Holt from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And it's pretty much the same character. I mean, he tells them off because they're not taking it seriously. just call him Captain Holt.
Actually, on the subject of the military, Johnny Storm's love interest, what did you make of that?
Is there something that I should have picked up on?
I didn't realise this until I looked up on Wikipedia, actually, that character was meant to be Frankie Ray. And in the comics, Frankie Ray is actually quite a big character. She has fire-like powers, kind of like Human Torch, and she ends up becoming a Herald of Galactus after Silver Surfer. But I didn't realise her name was Frankie Ray for the entire film. I don't know when it was said. I think at some point someone says Captain Ray.
I think they might have said Frankie, or Human Torch says Frankie at some point, because that rings a bell.
Yeah, in the comics, she's a lot bigger a character. Don't know if they were working towards that. Apparently they were working on a sequel for The Silver Surfer, which is bizarre considering how little he has to do in this film.
So like a spin-off?
Yeah, they were going to do a spin-off, which is apparently why they didn't want to show Galactus as well, is because they were saving that for the Silver Surfer.
Right, so this one was the rise of the Silver Surfer. Was the next one just the fall of the Silver Surfer?
I think that would be jumping a few steps, I imagine. Quite a short step. Probably just Silver Surfer.
Silver Surfer, the rise of the Fantastic Four.
But it's just everything that was wrong with these old comics is let's not show the villain in this film. The main villain, let's not show him because we're saving him for a sequel.
Actually, you saying that does make sense because just before the credits, where you see him floating in space and he opens his eyes and his board then flies after him. And that would make sense then that they are planning something, but what they're planning was probably terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, at this point, they had made Daredevil, they had made Elektra, X-Men 3, and they had made the 2 Fantastic Four films. They were on a real run at this point in their history.
Out of those films, I like Daredevil, I like X3, and I've not seen Elektra.
I don't know how you can... X3 is... All right, let's not go on to other films. We'll save those for other episodes, but shall we move on to the comics now? How familiar were you with the Fantastic Four before you read this?
I mean, not really. I've never picked up a Fantastic Four comic. You'll be surprised that I have read Age of Ultron.
Is that because of the film?
Yeah, it was. From memory, Sue has quite a big part in the comic. So, again, I knew the sort of characters, but I said I've not picked up a comic based on the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, because they show up in a lot of crossovers, and obviously being Marvel's first family, they're sort of the origin of this sort of Marvel shared universe that they have in the comics now. So they have become quite prevalent within pop culture and things. Obviously not as much as, say, Spider-Man, who came afterwards, but yeah, I mean, I think most people have some familiarity with them. So what did you know?
I knew the powers, I knew the relationships, so Reed and Sue being together, Sue and Johnny being siblings, the Thing being Reed's friend, and then coming together as like a family. You know, I knew that they were Marvel's first family.
So broad strokes, but not much about the storylines that they've been involved with in their own comics and, you know, their supporting cast or characters.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that I've learned online. So, you know, I do know a fair few of their villains. I knew of Silver Surfer and Doom. And I think there's a lot of sort of space adventures with them. Yeah. I'm probably saying a lot of wrong things here, but...
No. I mean, there's certainly more sciencey and space adventures and, you know, parallel universes and stuff than a lot of other heroes. You know, that is where they've fallen, especially in recent years, as the sort of science family.
And does the microverse play into the Fantastic Four?
It does, yeah, and the negative zone.
That's it.
So yeah. So okay, well, so you've got the fundamentals. So you weren't going into this completely blind. So what were your first impressions of this comic?
I mean, we've gone back to the old style, haven't we?
We've gone back actually further than we have ever before. So X-Men was the 80s.
Yeah, so you're talking what, sort of 20 years, 15 years between those comics?
Yeah, this was 1966, so we're talking 14 years before the oldest comic that we've read so far.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see some comparatives with X-Men, Days of Future Past, with this. You know, the old writing style, the over-explaining things.
And this would have been that to the nth degree, wouldn't it? Because obviously by the time Claremont came around, that was quite toned down from this 1960s approach and Stan Lee's writing.
There are bits that something will happen and then a character's like, oh no, this has just happened. We've just seen it. We've just read it. As you just sort of said, it is worse than X-Men. You know, there's a bit in the annual one with the wedding. The Thing hears someone shout, help, and you know it's coming from behind the door. And he literally says, oh, someone needs my help behind that door.
Part of this is because of the way these comics were written. And I don't know, have you ever heard of the Marvel method or Marvel style of storytelling?
No, but I feel like you touched on it very briefly previously.
It sort of fell out of favour a bit, but in these early days of Marvel writing, the way that they would write a story, the writer would do a synopsis, a very brief synopsis, would hand it to the artist, and the artist would then basically plot and draw the entire comic book.
Yeah.
And then it would go back to the writer, and the writer would add dialogue and text afterwards based on the pictures.
Okay.
Which is why you quite often have a storyline that works perfectly well. If you just ignore all the text and just bounce between panel to panel, you can figure out what's going on. And then you quite often have this sort of superfluous writing on each and every page that says, and then, you know, I'm going to bounce over here and punch this person. Because it's basically Stan Lee just writing what he can see on the page.
Okay, so, sorry, just to sum up what you've just said there, just to make sure I understand. So The writer would make a summary of the story, then the artist would then go away to draw that, and
Yeah.
then the writer would come back in and fill the picture with the writing.
Yeah, so the synopsis that they give, it can be really brief. You know, some artists have told stories about Stan Lee just saying, oh, this week Spider-Man fights Electro.
Right, okay.
And then the artist would go and create a whole comic book based on that, and then Stan Lee would come in and write the dialogue. I was having a look online. For Fantastic Four #1, his synopsis was 4 pages long.
Okay.
By the time this came around, they were about half a page long.
Wow. You think it would go the other way?
Well, no, because this is the thing. Because obviously when Fantastic Four came around, it's the birth of this shared Marvel universe.
Mm-hmm.
And because Stan Lee was famous for his time, I mean, for a comic book writer, he became really well known. So they just basically want to put him on as many things as possible.
Yeah.
Which is why at the time he was writing Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Mighty Thor, Avengers, you know, all of these things. So the more he got given, the less input in many ways he had with regards to writing the comics. The synopses that he was providing got shorter.
Okay. So does that carry across throughout the years then?
Yeah, the Marvel style was just their house way of writing stories. So this was across the board. This is what a lot of them would do to varying levels of success. And then it sort of fell out of favour for a long while. And it has actually made a bit of a comeback in recent years. You know, some modern writers believe that it gives the artist more creative freedom if they just give them the broad strokes and then say, right, well, go and draw that.
Okay.
But it has led to some discussion about the creative input of both people, and you'll find it's quite widely publicised online, the disputes that have happened between Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, who did Spider-Man and Stan Lee, and how much creative input Stan Lee actually had in those storylines.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you've just said Jack Kirby. The artwork itself across the whole book, it's not always the same sort of style, especially when the Human Torch goes to space. The artwork changes. So there's a couple of different and unique black and white pages.
Well, not quite black and white, but they're collage. He would play with the art styles that he was using. So there were quite a few of these where he would create a whole page which would be made up of collage art as opposed to traditional hand-drawn art. But yeah, I mean, Kirby is very much revolutionary for his art. You know, he worked on Captain America before this, you know, so he's been going for a long time by this point. And a lot of the things that he did, which sort of seem commonplace today and, you know, were revolutionized by him. This idea of characters being able to leave one panel and then sort of fall onto the next, and characters striking or punching or moving towards the reader. You know, stuff like that, which seems quite simple, but it just wasn't done before. You know, these artistic flourishes that he put on things were down to him, and that's popularised it within the medium.
Yeah. We've kind of like jumped around a little bit. Let's go back to the annual. So annual 4, I want to say.
Annual number 3.
Yeah, and then annual 3. So that's the wedding, really. That's what the first third of the film is based on, is the wedding.
Yes.
Very loosely, I guess.
Very, very loosely, yes. There's a wedding, and that's about it.
There's a wedding, and it gets interrupted, I think.
Yeah, the whole annual is they announce the wedding of Sue and Reed. Doctor Doom promises to ruin the wedding, and then basically every single hero and villain from Marvel at that time shows up to have a fight in the street.
Yeah, it's so handy that they know so many superhero friends, because, I mean, you've got a whole list. You know, you've got Hawkeye, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Spider-Man, X-Men.
They all live in New York, don't they? So, you know, they can all turn up. I mean, a few of them were invited to the wedding as well. I think Professor X and Tony Stark were there anyway. And then obviously the X-Men follow wherever Professor X goes.
Oh yeah, of course.
I actually wrote down the full list of everyone I recognised, and I'm not going to read it out because it goes on and on and on.
No, go on. Let's see how quickly you can read that list.
I don't want to do that.
I want you to do that.
Okay, fine. So you got Doom, the Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Patsy Walker and Hedy Wolf. Forbushman was mentioned, Nick Fury, Puppet Master, the Red Ghost and his apes, Professor X, Mole Man and the Moloids, the X-Men, the original 5, Doctor Strange, the Mandarin, the Black Knight, Kang, Awesome Android, Grey Gargoyle, Thor, Super Skrull, Daredevil, Captain America, the Cobra, the Executioner, Scourge, Enchantress, Mr. Hyde, Hawkeye, Spider-Man, Electro, Unicorn, Melter, Beetle, Eel, Quicksilver, the Human Top, Atuma, Uatu, Porcupine, Gabe Jones, Dum Dum Dugan, Jack Kirby, and Stan Lee.
That's chunky.
And that's basically the whole comic, isn't it? It's literally just, here's a new villain, here's a new hero to fight them. So there's not a huge amount to talk about that.
I would say that you've got a panel, maybe 2 per person, really.
Yeah. And then it's a big brawl at the end, and then they get married after it's all sorted out because Reed goes and gets a time machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I thought it was good fun. I liked reading it. It's a nice little standalone, old-fashioned, very light-hearted. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I know most of those characters. I'm not going to say I know all of them, but I know most of them from the films. People like Scourge or the Executioner, I wouldn't have known if I hadn't watched Thor 3.
Yeah.
So I enjoy reading about characters that I already know something about. And yeah, it is a good comic to start to get the feel of the Fantastic Four and the world that they're in.
It gives you a sense of the writing style without anything too heavy. I mean, what you'll find about this era of comics is there's nothing going to happen that is overly heavy. I think this storyline, part of the reason it's become as famous and as long-standing as it has is because actually it's quite unusual for its time in that it has a multiple issue arc, it has characters sort of being redeemed, introduces new characters like the Silver Surfer. So yeah, it has a bit more going on than your average comic from those times.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's go on to the coming of Galactus. What were your thoughts on the 3-issue arc itself?
I did find it weird. So the very first one of those 3, it continues the previous storyline.
Yeah.
And it literally takes up half of the first one.
And in fact, the 3rd issue in this as well, issue 50, the second half of that is setting up the act that follows. Each comic would set up the next one, so readers would find out what happens next time on, it's like a radio play or a soap opera. So it would get people to then go and buy the next issue because they're halfway through.
Come back for more.
Yeah, they're halfway through a story. So what is going to happen with Maximus the Mad and the Inhumans? Find out next week. But if you get to the end of that comic and, they take Max off and that's the end of the comic, what's to get people to pick up the next week? Well, how about this? We got this Silver fella. What's he about?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably a good selling point. Obviously, now we've got them in these books, which we can literally read story 1 to 5 in one book.
Yeah.
Obviously, back then you had kids that had to buy it every couple of weeks or month even.
It's a different reading experience, and this is the same with X-Men when we talked about the fact that it would always recap things, is because it was being read month to month, and there's no guarantee that the person reading that issue actually picked up the previous issue. So first of all, they have to explain what all the characters are and what's going on, even if you've already read it, and then they have to leave it open-ended enough to get you to buy the next one.
Yeah.
As such, you have this very sort of verbose writing style. As you said before, a lot of words on the page, almost entirely too many.
Yeah, even the way it's been worded is quite hard to read sometimes. There are sort of very over-the-top wording.
That was very much Stan Lee's writing style. None of the characters actually speak like real human beings. They all sound like sort of carnival barker, just shouting or exclaiming things at each other on what's going on around them.
I mean, Sue in the comic, to me, she spends a lot of her time, either she's trying to take care of Reed or she's asking what's happening. It's almost like she's been made to be like this 50s housewife.
Yeah, you had this a lot, and the same thing happened in early X-Men, where you have the male heroes and then you have the token woman, and the woman's job for the most part is to sort of ask what's going on. And a lot of time the art will show the character doing something quite competent or quite action heavy, and the dialogue will still be of that ilk. It will be them being confused or scared, when you could have equally had that character saying something badass and it wouldn't have affected the story. They instead have them going, what's going on?
Yeah, it's kind of like the companion in Doctor Who.
Yes.
They're there to ask questions just purely so the main character can explain it to that person who's asked, but also explain it to the audience.
Yeah, whereas in the nicest possible way, these stories are not overly complicated. Nothing really needs explaining to the audience that isn't already in the art, and there's a lot of dialogue here that does explain what's going on already in the pictures to someone who's reading it.
Yeah.
I mean, admittedly, these were geared towards, all ages, but mainly children. And so, they had to make them accessible. In terms of the storyline then, what did you make of that?
Well, once we got into it at the end of the first issue, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed to find out about the characters and read about the Silver Surfer, why he was doing it, and it's a complete sort of change from the film.
Yeah.
It's more in depth, and then when Galactus finally comes to the Pax building, he has to build his, what we call like a structure or a weapon.
His machine is like, Kirby drew a lot of these really sort of outlandish, machines with all sort of tubes and strange things on them. He loved drawing that sort of thing.
Yeah, so it's not the fact that he'll just turn up and that's it, done. It explains the fact that he needs to do something while he's here, and then he'll win.
Yeah.
That's when the conflict happens. So you get a more in-depth and more fleshed out bad guy.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that he's not a moustache twirling, I'm evil, I'm here to do bad villain.
I'll get you next time.
Yeah, he turns up, he's like, I need to eat this planet, and these people are insignificant in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Which I quite like, that sort of philosophical side of things. I think both Stan Lee and Jack Kirby have talked about this sort of biblical inspiration for the character, how Galactus is a sort of god. Silver Surfer is his fallen angel.
His herald.
And as such, the rest of the other characters in here are just humans.
Yeah.
So it's not that he's villainous, he's not out to get the Fantastic Four, he just doesn't care about them.
Yeah, he thinks that they're tiny, or they're bugs, or they're insects.
Yeah, insignificant gnats,
Yeah.
I think is what he calls them.
But yeah, he often actually talks about himself in the third person quite a lot. But it jumps around a bit. He doesn't always do it. It's just like, all right, either do or don't. Pick one.
Doctor Doom did that a lot as well. And I think, yeah, they tapped into something there that, people who talk about themselves in the third person are dicks. So, good work, Stan Lee. You know how to make people hate a character.
There are a couple of things actually that I picked up on that I don't know whether it's just expressions of the time or it's things that Stan Lee's just started to make up. Like the thing says at one point, you're making a mountain out of a mouse hole. Is that a thing? Because I always thought it was you're making a mountain out of... Oh, I've forgotten the saying now.
You're making a mountain out of a molehill.
There you go, that one. Yeah, so how can you make a mountain out of a mouse house?
I think sometimes they gave Thing these quirks of dialogue to make him sound a bit like working class, and even though he was a trained pilot.
Yeah, and not touched on at all. I didn't know that. I wouldn't come away from this comment thinking, oh, he's a trained pilot. And also the way that the text has been made for him, it cuts a lot of things, so it's like him rather than him.
Yeah, they've given him that really sort of earthy working class dialogue.
Yeah.
And that's part of his origins as well. He's got this whole thing about Yancey Street.
Yeah, he does use a lot of insults or a lot of terms for other people. You've got Curly, you got Stretch, Buttercup, all these like random little like insults or names that he calls people.
Yeah.
A couple of my favourites was he calls someone a piker, which I had to look up what that was, and I think it's a gambler. And also I think he calls Galactus a creepy king-sized crumb bum, which... I think it's Stan Lee's sort of take on a couple of sayings back then.
I don't think that's how anyone ever spoke.
No.
So I think it is very much meant to be written, not meant to be said. It's quite entertaining. There's some good turns of phrases in there, but doesn't sound like a realistic version of any human that you know.
Yeah, it's very cartoonish.
It's massively over the top, but it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of points that I find quite funny, really. There's a particular scene when Johnny finds the Thing and Mr. Fantastic having a shave, which Johnny says, what's with you guys? Galactus is planning to tear our planet apart, and you're making it like a TV shaving commercial.
Yeah.
The first thing I thought of there was Captain America in Endgame. Obviously, he's got that beard in Infinity War, and then in Endgame, it sort of cuts to him, and he's just shaved off his beard. So it seems like heroes, regardless if it's the 60s or now, they always have time to shave, even when you've got this huge fight coming up.
Yeah. Obviously, in preparation for the final battle, they go and obtain the ultimate nullifier. But yeah, what did you make of the ending?
I do quite like that the Watcher sends off the Human Torch, even though his role is to not get involved. In theory, he doesn't, but he sends away the Human Torch to get the weapon, so he does get involved.
Yeah.
But not as much as he could.
So the ultimate nullifier, it makes a few appearances later on as well in the comics, but obviously the idea behind it is it's a powerful weapon that can destroy anything, but will also definitely destroy the wielder, the person using it.
Okay.
In this comic, Galactus says about it wiping the entire galaxy out, and that's when he basically says, well, you destroy us all, and Reed basically says, yeah, but what have I got to lose?
Yeah, I mean, it's either we die by your hand or by mine. So either you kill us or I kill all of us, including you.
Yeah.
And then he's like, okay, fair enough, I'll leave you alone. So it does work. It's just a little bit...
Yeah, I think it plays in quite well into this thing I was talking about earlier with the character being biblical as opposed to an outright villain, is that if they had got into a fist fight and defeated him, it would have diminished him as a character. This has suddenly got too much effort. I'll go find somewhere else to eat. Just give me the gun and I'll go.
He weighs up his options. He's like, right, okay, yeah, I'll go away. I'll go eat some other planet. See ya.
And then obviously before he goes, he leaves Silver Surfer. He strands him on Earth, which is how Silver Surfer becomes a character for the next Well, till this very day, really. Although he does eventually regain his powers to go back into space. And then, of course, we have the next part of the comic, which we won't dwell on too much, is setting up the future arc. So you see the mysterious figure plotting against them, and then you have Johnny going to college and meeting Wyatt Wingfoot for the first time, who becomes quite a major character as part of the Fantastic Four supporting cast.
So does Wingfoot have a sort of an alter ego?
No, he doesn't. No, actually, he's one of the sort of human supporting cast. So he doesn't have powers, although he has a lot of physical prowess. And then eventually he gets into a relationship with She-Hulk at one point, I think.
Okay.
But he's around for a while. You know, he's one of the mainstay supporting casts of the Fantastic Four.
So is he someone that, with the upcoming She-Hulk TV series, we might expect to see like cameo or an Easter egg for?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. But then She-Hulk was on the Fantastic Four in lieu of Thing for a while, which obviously is not going to be covered in the or probably is not going to be covered in the series. So he might be in there, but maybe just as an Easter egg. Which brings us on to...
Cue the music.
Iain's egg hunt. Iain's egg hunt. Iain's egg hunt.
I'm not yoking you.
So this is Iain's Egg Hunt, the part of the show where Iain, with his penchant for Easter eggs, is going to enlighten us about things that he has found out about this week's film. Iain, what have you got?
Right, so first off, I have to mention the late, great Stan Lee. He makes one of his renowned cameos in this. He gets turned away from the wedding, very similarly to the comics, where him and Jack Kirby both do. This is Stan Lee's first, but not only cameo where he plays himself. He also plays himself in Captain Marvel, which doesn't actually say his name, but he's on the train and he's reading the script for Mallrats.
Yeah, he's reciting his lines from that film, isn't he?
Yeah, and maybe he played himself in Endgame as well. I mean, that's up for debate, I guess.
Yeah, he might be.
Also, in the film, there's a particular speech that Reed gives General Hagar, or Captain Holt, where he talks about being a good little nerd, which is actually literally taken word from word from Ultimate Extinction #2, where he's talking to Nick Fury. You won't be surprised, but I've not actually read that. That's something that I actually found out online.
I have, but a long time. I don't remember that speech from it, but yeah, that's good to know. Yeah.
One last point to end on. As we're all aware, Galactus in this film is just a big old stupid cloud. However, there are actually two scenes where you can kind of see a shadow that looks like his comic counterpart. Yeah,
the sort of buttresses he has on the side of his head.
Yeah, exactly. So the first bit is the shadow that passes over Saturn. And the second point is right towards the end, when the Silver Surfer flies up to face him, you can kind of see his face within the fiery mass.
Yeah.
That's it, baby.
Actually, I have an Easter egg for you this week.
Oh, go on.
That I picked up on whilst watching the film.
Okay.
So I thought the minister at Reed and Sue's wedding looked familiar, and it's actually Brian Posehn, who I recognised from all sorts of D&D type things, but he is also a stand-up comedian and actor who, among other things, went on to write for Marvel Comics. He wrote Deadpool in 2012 for about 45 issues.
Oh, wow.
So there's a Marvel link there.
Well, there you go. The only thing that I've seen him in previously is The Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, I don't watch that.
I'm sad to say I've seen all of it.
I am sad to say that as well. Okay, well, thank you very much for your Easter eggs this week. Shall we get back to the films and the comic and wrap things up?
I think we shall, yes.
So experiencing this comic and Fantastic Four for the first time, what were your first impressions of them in the comics?
I really enjoyed the comic as a whole, really. I enjoyed the story. It's inspired me to read more Fantastic Four comics.
Oh, good. Because I think you'll really like it. In fact, you're a big Doctor Who fan, right? So there was a run of Silver Surfer that took heavy inspiration from Doctor Who. He got a sort of human companion and then was travelling around the universe with her. So I think you might really enjoy that.
Interesting.
But generally speaking, the oldest style of comic books that we've read so far, how did you get on with that aspect of things?
I mean, as we've already sort of said, the only thing I can compare this to so far would be X-Men.
Yeah, it's probably most similar in writing style to that, although X-Men was a little bit more updated.
Yeah, I feel this was harder to read, possibly because it was so early on, actually 66, I think we've said. You can definitely tell it's a comic of its time.
Yeah. I mean, we think about comic books, they've not actually been around for that long. Realistically, the first superhero comic was only around in the 1930s, and a lot of the things that we know about Marvel nowadays stem from these 1960s 50s comics, and this era has been influential for years to come.
Yeah, so the various themes and ideas they've sort of carried on.
Yeah, and what you find as well, the characters, you find that they are still relevant today, whereas a lot of writers struggle to create characters with that sort of longevity, and that's largely just because people are used to those characters and they like reading about the same characters over and over again. I do feel that Galactus in his subsequent appearances was slightly diminished for a while. You know, the more you saw of him, the more of a generic villain he became.
Yeah.
I think in this first thing, he is such a, otherworldly force. And they definitely brought that back later on. You know, more recent comics treat him more like a force of nature. You know, something that is timeless and like a hurricane, ironically like a hurricane, just sort of blowing through. He is not evil, he is just Galactus.
Yeah, I mean, spot on, really.
Okay, so what about the film then? So you've said you like it.
Yeah.
I am of the opinion that there are good, fun popcorn films, and then there is this Fantastic Four.
I like bad films. There are films that people think are terrible, but I enjoy them because they are so bad. Because it's not complicated. It's an easy watch.
So you saying this is more sort of a so bad it's good thing?
I mean, I would say so. Weirdly enough, it's the best one out of the four, and it's not that good. I mean, I would take this over the new Fan 4 stick.
Oh, every day. Yeah, that was a mess of a film.
Yeah, it's a film you can whack on. You don't need to think. You've used the correct phrase there of a popcorn film. Mm-hmm. It's something to put on. There's no twists. There's no surprise at the end. It's here's the good, here's the bad. I mean, comparing it to last week when we both watched Vendetta, it's just easy to watch.
Yeah, I understand. As I said earlier, I always find that there are better popcorn films. If I want to watch a good fun action romp of a superhero genre, I will go and watch Ant-Man, or I'll go and watch a lot of the Marvel films that follow. I just find that in quite a saturated market, this doesn't really stack up, and it does a lot of those early 2000 things that I really dislike.
Yeah, I would take any of the MCU films, even the bad ones, over this.
3 worst MCU films.
Thor: The Dark World,
mm-hmm.
Maybe Iron Man 3, and maybe The Incredible Hulk.
Interesting you put Iron Man 3 on that list, because we're planning on covering that quite soon. Also, I would definitely put it miles above Iron Man 2.
I'm not saying that Iron Man 3 is a terrible film, but I think it's one of the lowest of the MCU films.
Okay. I think that's the thing with the MCU is they've stumbled across a formula that kind of works for all of their films. So even their worst films are still enjoyable popcorn flicks. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so one thing we touched on, but we didn't really go into detail, was the role of Alicia Masters in the film and the comic. Because obviously in the comic, she is intrinsic to that, rehabilitation of Silver Surfer. Mm-hmm. So what do you make of Alicia as a character in both film and comic?
I mean, she's definitely more fleshed out in the comics. I don't even think it's mentioned in the films that she's a sculptress. Obviously, she is the one that causes the Silver Surfer to have a change of heart. And I use the term change of heart rather than change of mind because I think that resembles more what happens to him.
Yeah, and Alicia's used a lot like that in the early Fantastic Four, and the dynamic between her and the Thing is one that's very interesting, is that he can only see himself as a monster after what happens to him, and she can't see him at all. Mm-hmm. Her blindness isn't always handled the best in the comics, but, I like what they did with that. And recently, actually, her and Ben Grimm got married as well.
Okay.
They did some very weird things in the 80s with her, where she went off with Johnny Storm, and it was all a bit soap opera-y, but... It got better.
I mean, yeah, the first time that she meets the Silver Surfer, she does sense that he has got this heart to him and he has got this heroicness inside of him that needs to come out.
Yeah, there is a little bit of sort of mystical blind sense, this idea that because she can't see, her ability to understand good and bad is better. It's a little bit odd.
It is a little bit, isn't it?
But also there's just the hilarious moment at the end where they're all on top of the Baxter building on a very tall high-rise building, and then just all leave a blind woman and go downstairs on her own. And Silver Surfer just flies off and she's trying to get down some stairs.
Yeah, I know. I expected either Ben to come back up or her to fall down. I don't know.
So that's one of the major differences. And I do feel like they gave her a little bit more to do in the second Fantastic Four film, but and I like the actor they got for her, but I still reckon they could have given her a bit more to do. So you've said that you enjoy the film and the comic, but what order would you recommend that someone read these in and watch these in?
I don't think it really matters which way you watch it or read it. But let's say you are new to comics. It's going to be quite hard because of the style of writing. So that needs to be bared in mind.
See, this is something that I think I quite often forget. Is because I've been reading comics for a long time and I'm very used to the medium. I sometimes forget that people approaching this as something brand new will not be familiar with the format and the layout of these things. So it's quite interesting to hear you say that. I mean, for me, I would say read the comic. It's a great insight into Silver Age comic books and probably the best work that Stanley and Jack Kirby have done together. And I think I would recommend the film to someone if I didn't particularly like them and wanted to waste their time.
I think we've got to bear in mind that at some point the Fantastic Four will join the MCU. So I think that it's worth going back to these types of films to see the difference of then and then now.
Yeah, I mean, I keep pointing out, though, this is not that long ago and it only predates the MCU by a year. I think Fox have just been regularly inconsistent with their treatment of Marvel properties.
Yeah, they don't have a good run, do they?
But yeah, enough about that. Let's go on to Ask the Teapot. We actually have two very similar questions sent in from our listeners, great minds and all that. Luke from Nottingham asks, what runs/series would you like to see adapted to the other format, e.g. comic runs to screen or vice versa? And at Stuart Bobbitt on Twitter asks, are there any other comic book series/characters that aren't already in the pipeline that you think would make a great TV or film adaptation?
Okay. A lot of comics that I've read have been inspired by films, so that's why I've gone to read them. But having a sort of quick think about films that potentially could make a good comic, something like Team America, I'll be curious if the humour would carry across.
Yeah, because the creators have sort of managed to turn their hands to various formats, haven't they? They've got obviously the Book of Mormon stage play musical, and they've done films and television, so it would be interesting to see if they could turn that to a comic book format as well.
And also, maybe something that would make a good graphic novel is John Wick.
Okay, yeah, because I think Keanu Reeves has recently released a comic book actually called Berserker.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You should check that out. If you like your John Wicks, that might be of interest to you.
Yeah, I feel that that could make a good, dark, quite violent graphic novel.
Yeah, let's hope it's better than the third one. A lot of the things that I was thinking of are already in production, actually. And obviously Stuart said that things that aren't in the pipeline. So Sandman is due to be a Netflix show soon. Why the Last Man? There's a Hawkeye series that looks like it's going to be based on Matt Fraction and David Aja's run, already in production.
Okay.
But if we're talking mainstream superhero comics, then as my favourite Marvel character, I am in a perpetual state of waiting for an Iron Fist film. I think it's a real shame that he's never had a live adaptation of his character ever. And I might even throw Luke Cage into the mix and make a sort of Heroes for Hire buddy movie. I think that would probably suit the action comedy aesthetic of the Marvel Cinematic Universe really well.
Yeah, I did quite like the Luke Cage TV show. It's a shame that they never ever released a TV show based on Iron Fist.
It feels like a missed opportunity, yeah. There's a good one series to be made out of those two series of Luke Cage as well, but but yeah. And as for director, I mean, I think for a sort of action, adrenaline-fueled Iron Fist martial arts film, I would go with Gareth Evans of The Raid fame. And for a Heroes for Hire film, I was thinking someone like Shane Black for the buddy action duo dynamic of Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, or The Nice Guys, or even the Lethal Weapons movies.
Yeah, that would work.
Next up, Kirsten in Gospel asks, did you start this podcast because you're both called Iain? So the answer is yes.
Well, actually, my name is Dave, but you told me to change it so we could start this podcast.
Yeah, well, I thought it would work better. But Iain was drunk when he filled in his form, which is why he spells his name wrong.
Very funny. Next question, please.
So, at It's Kirsty B on Twitter asks, what comic would you recommend as a starting off point for a comic book newbie? Now, that is a great question, and I'll let Iain go first on this one, because I have a very long answer for this, and once I start talking, I don't think he'll get a word in edgeways.
I'm sure you've got a whole list there, really. Yes. I mean, as we all know, I'm fairly new to reading comics. I think a lot of one-shots are a good place to start, especially if you've already seen films or TV shows with a character in there that you like. I mean, particularly, I'm a fan of the Flash TV show. So once I'd watched that, I did then read Flashpoint. So because I had the understanding of the characters already, I enjoyed comic run, but I want to now read tie-in stories as well.
Cool, yeah. I'll preface my statement by saying that no one comic is going to be right for everyone. Just as no film or prose novel is going to be universally loved, there isn't one comic that is going to convert anyone to a comic book reader. So I will say there are two ways you could go about this. And the first is actually what Iain has just said. If you are looking to get into a comic book series because you have an interest in a certain character or franchise through the movies or television, then you may have to do a bit of research, but whether that's Thor, X-Men, Star Wars or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, there are some very good runs if you know where to look. You just might need someone to point you in the right direction. But mainstream superhero comics aren't always the best place to start if you're new to the medium. They often have a fairly convoluted backstory, and the ongoing nature can be a little daunting. So, instead, I would advise picking up something self-contained, a graphic novel which tells the story from beginning to end in one volume, or an ongoing series not set within a pre-existing universe, like most Marvel and DC comic books are. And again, because I don't think there is one comic that is going to work for everyone, I'm going to break this down by genre.
Okay.
So, if you're a fan of biographies and autobiographies, then Mouse by Art Spiegelman and Persepolis by Marjan Satrapi are gateway comics for a lot of people. For true crime lovers, there's a Treasury of Victorian Murders series by Rick Geary. And then there's fictionalised versions of true events like Laika by Nick Abadzis. That's a real tearjerker. But let's say you're looking for something a little lighter. If science fiction is your thing, then you could look at the space opera Saga or the post-apocalyptic Y: The Last Man, both by Brian K. Vaughan. If you like fantasy, you could try The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen by Alan Moore or Fables by Bill Willingham, both of which use pre-existing literary characters or fairy tale characters to tell a modern story. If you like pulp crime fiction, there's Criminal by Ed Brubaker. For horror, there's Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. And then there's just great comics like Day Tripper by Fabio Moon and Gabriel Barr. I could go on, but the point is that when entering into an unfamiliar medium, you're probably going to have an easier time if you pick up something from a genre that already appeals to you. I guarantee you there is a comic out there for you, but as we've discovered through this podcast, not everything is for everyone.
Okay, so quite a long list there. What might be best then, potentially, is if Kirsty was to get back in touch, maybe you can point her more in a certain way.
I think that's usually best because any suggestion that you give has always got to be catered to your audience. You know, you bounced off of V for Vendetta last week because you're not particularly political, and that is just the way it is. So if you want to get back in touch and ask about a specific genre that interests you, I can probably recommend you something that I think would be right for you. So Kirsty also asks, who is your favourite movie Batman?
Okay, I'm assuming she means live action.
She hasn't said that.
Okay.
My answer is going to be Kevin Conroy. But if we're talking live action, I'm probably going to go with Christian Bale from the Dark Knight series. I think he's the person who's best interpreted both the Bruce Wayne and the Dark Knight personas. But actually, I think a lot of the live action adaptations have been pretty good. And then there's George Clooney.
I really enjoyed Will Arnett in the Lego Batman movie.
Yes.
I mean, I think the whole thing is done for comedic effect. But I mean, if we are to narrow it down to live action, I mean, I am a fan of Batman from the 80s.
Yeah.
So that would be Michael Keaton. But also, I mean, I do like Ben Affleck. It's just a real shame that he's not had good script to work with.
See, I don't like Ben Affleck as Batman or... I think he could have made a good Batman. I just think what he's been working with is not the Batman that I know. I mean, the fact that he's there gunning down and killing, random drug dealers and things like that is just not what Batman is about. Nothing about his interpretation, apart from a slight broodiness, has said Batman to me since it started.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully the two that I've just said, I think they are coming back. So it'd be good to see what they do in the future.
I'm looking forward to Robert Pattinson's interpretation as well. I think that should be a very interesting take on things, and hopefully one that's a bit more true to the character itself.
Yeah, I'm not too sure which way they're going to take him. But yeah, same here.
That's all for this week's episode. Thank you for those who sent in questions, and thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this foray into the Silver Age of Marvel Comics, then why not dive into Marvel Unlimited's back catalogue of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee's works. Between the Fantastic Four, Incredible Hulk, Mighty Thor and Avengers alone, there is enough to keep you going for quite some time. If it's Fantastic Four in particular that you're interested in, then you could also check out the acclaimed run from the 80s by John Byrne, who you'll remember from our coverage of X-Men Days of Future Past, or... if you want to read something a bit more current, I would heartily recommend the Jonathan Hickman run that started with Dark Reign Fantastic Four in 2009. If it's Silver Surfer that you want, then I would suggest the 2014 and 2016 runs of Silver Surfer by Dan Slott and Mike Allred, or the recent Silver Surfer Black by Donny Cates and Trad Moore. If you have a question for Ask the Teapot, then you can email us at becometheteapot@hotmail.com or tweet us at becometheteapod using the hashtag AskTheTeapot. So, onwards and upwards. I think it's time we paid another visit to Marvel's distinguished competition, and what I can only assume will be a step up in quality. So, let me just check my notes. Next episode, we will be... Oh no. Next episode, we will be discussing the 2011 film Green Lantern, starring Ryan Reynolds. I assure you, there is a good reason for this. I thought it was high time that we examined some comics made this side of the Y2K. So, join us next time as we'll be reading Jeff Johns' Green Lantern Rebirth and Green Lantern Secret Origins.
Bye, everybody.